This is Crossroads. Welcome back. I'm Michelle McCory.
And I'm David Schuster.
Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro is condemning the latest round of violence in the nation that left several politicians injured and bloodied.
Dozens of pro-government activists wielding sticks and metal bars stormed the National Assembly building on Wednesday, which is controlled by opposition forces. And Wednesday was Independence Day in Venezuela. More than 350 politicians, journalists, and guests who were in that opposition-controlled building were trapped there for several hours. During the siege, many of the injured tended to their wounds right inside. Clashes against Maduro erupted 3 months ago, and since then, at least 91 people have been killed. Protesters blame President Maduro for a crippled economy and a widespread food shortage.
To speak more about the latest outbreak of violence in Venezuela, we're joined by Antonio Mora, Venezuela affairs analyst and former network news anchor, and Damian Pachter, our own i24NEWS Latin America correspondent, joining us now from our headquarters in Tel Aviv. Thank you both. And Antonio, I'd like to start with you because despite the violence, some lawmakers are pledging that they will go ahead with a vote that would essentially move towards an election ousting President Maduro. How do you see that playing out?
It'll be interesting to see how that election plays out, Michelle, because it's a referendum that's been called by the opposition-controlled National Assembly. It's scheduled for Sunday the 16th, and it does not have the government apparatus behind it to really set up a formal election. So a lot of the vote is going to be happening in churches. It's going to be more of an informal vote. So I don't know how that's going to play out. The reality is, whatever vote happens, I'm sure will be overwhelming against the Maduro government. The question is going to be what happens after that. There's some talk that the General Assembly may name a different president, may name a different Supreme Court. They may try to sort of create a parallel government. But what that will lead to is anybody's guess.
And Damian, when President Maduro is condemning this latest attack on an opposition-controlled building, is that to be believed, given that there's a lot of anger and frustration and fears that maybe Maduro is causing red flag operations to somehow generate sympathy for him and portray the protesters as to be condemned?
Well, actually, the people who stormed the National Assembly yesterday were, according to local reports, are part of the so-called colectivos, which is a parallel unit which works for the government unofficially as a storm force. They use them every time. It's not the first time that having incidents recorded in the National Assembly, but this was pretty much the most hard of them all. And we still need to see what will happen in a few weeks under this context of what I consider to be a general chaos.
And Antonio, what do you make of Maduro's condemnation?
It's a joke, David, pure and simple. Damian's absolutely right. These are groups of thugs, paramilitary, that the government finances and directs. They basically went in there and with impunity. There are terrible pictures of them beating up people, kicking congressmen on the floor, while the National Guard that's supposed to safeguard Congress is just standing there feet away, allowing this to happen. So for Maduro to be saying that is really just a complete and utter lie. The government was behind what happened there.
Antonio, as we see these protests intensify and escalate, is there a big concern that they're going to go way beyond Caracas and really be prevalent in more cities in Venezuela?
Well, they have, Michelle. Part of the problem that we've got is that there is so little international media in relative terms in Venezuela. If it were a story of this size, the world would have descended on Venezuela in the past, but the Venezuelans have not allowed many news organizations to get into Venezuela. So the reality is there just simply aren't that many people, and most of them are concentrated in the capital. But there are protests going on everywhere in the country. So this is not just something that's happening in the capital.
And Damian, what's been the reaction across Central America as you've seen?
Well, actually, the reactions in South America, it's something that it's very worrying because none of the countries which are close to Venezuela or even with a little diplomatic distance, they don't seem to actually condemn in hard terms what's going on during the past months, besides regular condemnations through diplomats. But it's not that involvement that very much serious, and people across Latin America are looking for the countries to step on and do and engage on harder steps.
Antonio, is there concern from these neighboring countries on about economic damage that they could suffer? Certainly, Venezuelans are fleeing the country. How are these neighboring countries handling the spillover?
Well, there was an attempt a couple of weeks ago to have a general condemnation by the OAS, the Organization of American States, of what's going on in Venezuela and to create some movement toward some sort of solution in Venezuela. And some countries that are economically beholden to Venezuela, because Venezuela has sent them oil, ended up either abstaining or voting against the resolution. And so the majority of countries in this hemisphere are together and want action taken. The Secretary General of the OAS today asked that a new extraordinary assembly of the OAS be called, because there really does need to be some hemispheric unity here in trying to solve this, because this is, I mean, really, you have to be clear about this. This is a national security issue for the United States and for all these countries. There are already refugee issues in some of the neighboring countries in Latin America. And Diego Arria, who at one point was the president of the Security Council of the United Nations, yesterday said that he could see 8 to 10 million refugees as a result of a total chaos in Venezuela. Even if he's grossly exaggerating, even if it's only a fraction of that, you're talking about very serious problems for Brazil, for Colombia, for the United States, for the Netherlands Antilles. So this is really a significant issue. And one final point on the national security side, Venezuela has thousands of man pads, you know, the shoulder missile fire weapons that can down airlines. So chaos in Venezuela is in nobody's interest, and there needs to be some international unity to find a solution.
And Antonio, in the meantime, how do you see this playing out over the next couple of weeks?
Well, we'll see that plebiscite, that referendum, a week from Sunday, and then we'll see what the opposition does after that. Then there's the scheduled vote for the end of July for this constituent assembly of Nicolás Maduro's, which is a farce. It is unconstitutional to be doing what he's doing. He's basically trying to impose a new constitution that will eliminate any vestige of democracy in Venezuela, will eliminate private property. He's basically trying to install a Cuban model in Venezuela, and this will be a tremendous tragedy for Venezuelans and for this hemisphere if it happens.
Antonio Mora, thank you so much. Our very own Damian Pachter, thank you to you as well.